Hey everyone, I'm Ed from Hustle Badger. Today we are talking to James Mulligan, who has been building a really exciting tool in AI for scientific research.
Everything that we have done for the last 20 years in terms of building software products is about to fundamentally change. And suddenly I'm like, right, I'm going to get up, I'm going to go start experimenting with that. By lunchtime, I've got a prototype up and running. I have to be honest, I have not slept much in the past 3 weeks since doing that, because what came next has blown my mind even more. The cost of doing this stuff has rocketed so quickly to zero that there is no reason for me to now have to use a tool that has been generalized to hundreds, if not millions of people. I can build something that perfectly meets my needs.
Hey everyone, I'm Ed from Hustle Badger. Today we are talking to James Mulligan, who has been building a really exciting tool in AI for scientific research. I'm going to let him introduce himself, though, and give us a few more details.
Thanks for having me, Ed. I'm James Mulligan. I'm a product director. I've spent about 20 years building software, a decade in advertising, so building things for brands like Nike, Google, Dyson, etc., and another decade doing it in AI with a company called QuantumBlack, which serves enterprise organizations on how to scale their AI capabilities. I have worked with every different size of product team, I think, from 1 or 2 engineers and a designer all the way up to 30, 40 person teams, through to QuantumBlack Labs, which is my old team, just about 300 product builders in my last role. I guess the overwhelming feeling in the last few months, especially in the last few months, is that everything that we have done for the last 20 years in terms of building software products is about to fundamentally change. So I'm going to show you what
I've
building.
had that feeling.
I'm going to show you what I'm building, but I think the takeaway here isn't necessarily that I'm going to build the next Atlassian, although, who wouldn't want to be the person doing that? I think it's more that I've gone on a bit of a re-education, and hopefully we can talk about some of those things to the benefit of other product managers and individuals looking to take advantage of this technology.
I think that's such an important point. Like when you play around with these tools, it's not just about learning to use the tools themselves. You're actually teaching yourself just about building software in general and how software works. And that's been a real benefit for me, I've found too.
Yeah, 100%. And before we dive in, I think that's a really, really interesting point. If I think about 20 years ago, when I first started building software, you had a little bit of HTML, some CSS, whack it up onto an FTP folder, and you were broadcasting to the world. In the past 20 years, that web development has got incredibly complex, all for the right reasons. That technology all serves a purpose. But I think even without AI, I think I have felt increasingly like I've become disconnected from how my engineers and the teams that I work with are actually building the solutions that we're taking to clients and putting out to the world. So this has been a re-education not just on AI and how that's going to change things, but also generally on what modern software development looks like. And I think those two things go hand in hand.
Yeah, great. Well, look, I know you've built something really exciting. So let's have a look at it, and then we'll talk a little bit more about how you got there and your process for building as well.
Got it. So I was diagnosed with something called multiple sclerosis about 8 years ago. And since then, I have hoarded scientific research on lifestyle interventions, improving your diet or exercise, sleep, all these sorts of things to kind of improve outcomes neurologically, whether that be because of an autoimmune disease or because generally you just want to keep your brain healthy, which I think becomes more and more important as you age. About last year, I decided, I'm going to put all of that research up online, or at least the synthesis I had done of that. And I built a solution called Cerebral Defence.com. And you can go check it out. It's largely a repository of interesting research that I found, all categorized into different domains like sleep, diet, physical exercise, and then with tactics that you can put in place to improve those things, as well as the metrics that surround them. Now, all of this is just built on WebFlow, which, for anyone who hasn't played around with it, is just like a WYSIWYG front-end website builder with a CMS in the back, a content management system. So everything here has almost no AI influence whatsoever. I have built something through a no-code editor and then uploaded my thoughts into a content management system, and abracadabra, it's now published onto cerebraldefence.com.
Amazing. So do you have an engineering background? Have you learned how to code, or is it?
No. And this is why I love WebFlow. I'm a big WebFlow fanboy. It doesn't require you to understand how to code, but it does teach you through the process of building your website how CSS influences the way things look, and how they function. As a teenager, I'd experimented with building websites, but in the past 20 years of building actual software products, like sustainable ones that clients are willing to buy, no, I've always worked with incredibly talented software engineers that handle that, and I've always played the role of a product manager.
Great. And so this was, am I right in thinking this was almost like the V1, the kind of static version, then you've built something else from the same information?
Correct. When I put this out into the wider world, suddenly there was a pressure to keep updating it. And that meant every morning reading through Google Scholar and various other sources, looking at the latest research, figuring out which of that research could then be published here. And that takes a lot of time, admittedly. And I think anyone here who is actually in a medical institution or a medical role will say that actually staying on top of research, especially nowadays, is really, really tricky. So I wanted to try and solve that. And initially, I think the reason I got excited about this is because, and anyone can do this, you can upload a PDF or a scientific research journal into ChatGPT, and it will do a great synthesis of it. Sometimes it won't get it perfectly right, but it's close enough that it's reliable that you can go reuse that information elsewhere. You can also put it into a language that anyone could understand. I'm not a medical professional, so methodologies around cohort studies and systematic reviews and the significance values and all these sorts of things are gobbledygook to me. I just want to know, how can I keep my brain healthy? So I knew that there was something that could be done there to improve things. I think also a lot of our work at QuantumBlack was about looking at general processes within an organization and figuring out whether it could be augmented or improved with AI generally. And this was with traditional AI, like predictive optimization style AI. And I wanted to go experiment to see whether I could do that with large language models. So I had a workflow, which was go find the research, which took a few hours, go synthesize that research, which took a few hours, publish that research, which took a few hours. And someone had put me onto Lovable as a tool a few weeks ago, and I thought, I wonder how quickly I could one-shot this. And I hate the expression one-shot, by the way, because as a seasoned product person, one-shotting is just ridiculous, right? There is not a single successful software product in the world that wasn't iterative by design.
Sure.
But I was curious. I was like, okay, I've been building for 20 years. I wonder what this thing Lovable can do. And so I went to Lovable and like any good product manager, broke down what my acceptance criteria looked like by feature and said, well, this is what I want it to do. And within a couple of hours, and I put a video up about this, you can watch it on Loom and also see the surprise on my face as it happens, is that I had a working automation where I could upload a PDF. It would send it off to the OpenAI API. It would send back that synthesis and display it to me. It sounds really, really simple, but a lot of people would end up paying a monthly subscription to Zapier or Make to do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where my obsession started. And I have to be honest, I have not slept much in the past 3 weeks since doing that, because what came next has blown my mind even more.
Amazing. And can we have a look at it?
Yes, absolutely. So as soon as that went up, and you can point people to the post and see what I did there. And I also appreciate that as a product manager and your audience being product managers, there's a healthy level of cynicism amongst that crowd, right? They're looking at all these LinkedIn posts and going, oh, that's hyperbole. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm going to put all of this just objectively out there, and there are limitations that we talk about. But after that, I was like, well, hang on. If we can build in a couple of hours an experience for a single user, what if that could be scaled up to multiple users? What if I could make that same functionality available to multiple people as a SaaS solution? And so I started noodling around with this idea called EvidenceBook.app. And the reason I liked this name is because when I put CerebralDefence.com up online, the conversations that I had were really targeted. Someone would say, well, hang on, what about dietary supplements? Should you be taking dietary supplements? I'm told that they're amazing, and everyone's selling them, so they must be good. And I found myself sharing research back and forth on specific questions. And I was very inspired by OpenAI's deep research, because you could go ask a question like that on OpenAI's deep research and get back a really, really good answer. But from my perspective, and I think also from a researcher's perspective, you want to know what the evidence is. You want to be able to interrogate it.
Sure.
And so I started doodling around this idea of evidence book. What if you could create a space where an individual could collect their research, have it analyzed by AI, create a database of that knowledge, so it can be queried. And you can do this in lots of tools like NotebookLM and other RAG-based solutions. But what if you could put that all together into a single experience where you could also then go publish that knowledge? And the next time someone said to me, hey, what do you think about dietary supplements? I can send them a link and say, this is what I think about dietary supplements. And this isn't just my opinion. It's backed by these research papers. And wouldn't it be cool if that person could then turn around and say, you haven't thought about this? So everything you're about to see has been built by AI. And then we'll look at the code base as well, and you'll see why that's pretty impressive for a couple of weeks' work by someone who's not an engineer. You land on EvidenceBook, and you can create yourself a project. So you can see I've created a number of different projects here. They all have different research questions. So in this instance, I've got one here that's around sleep. So what is the impact of sleep quality and quantity on neurological health and functioning? All of this is instantiated to the user. So if I were to log in as Ed or someone else, you'd be able to create your own projects and upload your own files and things like that. None of which was possible in the Lovable prototype. And that's not to say it wasn't possible to build it with Lovable. It's just that I was curious if you could scale it beyond that. So this is essentially bare bones SaaS, what would have taken historically months to build with an engineering team. In each of these projects, you can see an overview of it. And bear in mind, I've spent almost no time on how this thing looks, which is a first for me. I normally obsess about how it looks first, but I was curious about functionality. So some of it looks a bit rough and ready.
It looks pretty good, I'd say.
I appreciate that.
For a starting point.
In here, you can see that the project is now, and previously it was just an upload function, but now there's a structure to it. There's an information architecture to it. So there's an overview of the project, what you're trying to research, the tags associated with that. There is a place where you can upload your documents. So these might be scientific research journals, might be other things. There is a place for you to then view the analysis of that. So here you can see the name of this paper, and I'll talk you through how all of this is done by AI in a bit. You can then look at a feed, which is a thing I'm playing around with to kind of automate the beginning of the journey. So how do you discover research? So here are some RSS feeds that I've put in place. And later, and I can show you what I've been building this morning since the OpenAI SDK came out, a place to discover entirely new research. Eventually, all of this will be funneled into a report or a book where you can say, look, these are my thoughts on sleep. Additionally, it meant that I could also build out an entire admin section to this, so I can control a lot of this stuff. So again, none of this was present in the Lovable demo 2 weeks ago, but this has all been built in the last 2 weeks. Obviously, there's a profile section, but as you come through to admin, I can control users.
So if I get this right, you spent a few days on Lovable playing around with a prototype, and then at some point you've moved this into Cursor or somewhere else, or Windsurf.
Yes. So just briefly on that, and then I'll double click on it, and we can I'll screen share you the code base, and you can see what it means. I wanted to see what was going on behind the scenes, and with Lovable, although you can upload it to GitHub, it's really designed for someone who doesn't want to look at the code. It's meant to be something that is entirely through a chat interface. And I was curious. So once it got up onto GitHub, I then started exploring IDEs like Cursor and Windsurf, and they're like clones of VS Code. So any of your engineers that you work with as a product manager are likely using something similar to write their code. And that's where I've continued building. There's a lot of preferences here around what would be better for each person. But do you ever walk down those streets in London where they've kept the Victorian facade, but they're building something behind it?
Sure.
That's what Lovable feels like to me.
Okay.
Right. Those tools feel like something where it purely working on the front end is all that matters. What's going on behind the scenes doesn't really matter as long as that front piece is working. And again, I don't want to rag on Lovable because I think it's an amazing tool. But as soon as I got that code base down, you could see there were like 4 or 5 different versions of the same file. As I'd got frustrated, and this is very human, I think, it clearly gone away and reinvented the wheel, built it all over again. So we'll come back to that. The end to end here is that we now have an interface, a solution, a SaaS solution for anyone to log into, create projects, upload documents. There is now a back end where, for example, this now has 10,000 journals in it, which again I used AI to scrape from another API. But that means I can control exactly which journals are being displayed to users. There's control around integrations. So there's an amazing open API called OpenAlex that you can get a lot of this research data from. And it also has control over prompts. So here you can see where some of the prompts that are used through the experience, you can control that in the admin section. So we're in Sleep. We've got 32 documents here. And we have decided we're going to upload a new document. So let's see. This isn't actually about sleep, but here's one from Frontiers of Neurology. And I've built this in a way that you can upload multiple documents. So here it's uploaded the PDF. So that's gone up into Superbase. It's created a row within a database in Superbase to say, look, this is a new document for this user. Eventually, all of those PDFs will be deleted for IP reasons, but the PDF is up there. So if we go look at that now, all we have is the file name. There's nothing extracted from it yet. We go to extract text here. This is really cool. I'm very proud of this. Initially, all of it was being done by a package called pdf.js, which is a JavaScript library for extracting text from PDFs. But you will have seen last week that Mistral, which is another big AI provider like OpenAI, released a model specifically for OCR for reading PDFs. And so very quickly, within about a day, and again, all of this was coded by AI, I was able to put both options through to this solution. Both of them essentially do the same job, but the Mistral one is actually a lot better at what it does. So here we've got a bunch of extracted text, and we can hit Analyze Document. And here are the prompts that are configured in the back end. And I'm just messing around with what the right prompt is to send to OpenAI for research.
And so which model are you getting to run the research on this article then?
Great question. So with the OpenAI API, so let's see here. If I edit this one here, you can see these are all the models that are available via the API. And 4.0 Mini was good enough to do the extraction through ChatGPT. So I've continued using it here, but it's also cheap. So we go back here, we can see this Frontier of Neurology's piece. If we analyze the document, let's say we use Research v2, start analysis. Now this will ping off all of that extracted text to a function in Superbase. Again, I knew none of these terms 3 weeks ago. All of it was an education through AI.
How long have you been playing around with AI tools?
About 3 weeks.
Okay.
It was bonkers to think. So what's happened there is all that extracted text has been sent to an edge function in Superbase where I can run API calls server-side because most APIs don't like to be called from a client side. OpenAI has then fired back a response, and it's because the prompt has asked for it. It's given back the URL for the DOI, so that's the unique URL for most scientific research. It's given back its title, the journal it's in, the publication date. It's then written a short summary, which I've explained what I want to see in that. It's given me the top 5 insights, which is supported by data. It's told me the evidence level, so that might be either a systematic review, cohort study, etc. It's written a little social post. This is a hangover from when I was doing the Cerebral Defence stuff, where I would then put it out onto Twitter, but not as necessary here. It's generated a bunch of keywords, and so what we have there is an analysis of that document. And later down the line, what I'd love to do is, historically, the way I was doing this is a short paragraph is what users wanted on Cerebral Defence, all in a way that a non-scientist would understand.
Amazing. And then do you have the level above that then when you can run analysis across multiple PDFs and get insights for one particular topic?
I can. So a lot of that just sits in Superbase as an SQL query at the moment. But if I wanted to upload 100 documents and do that at the same time, I would, or could, sorry. I think what's fascinating about this is that as long as you have your great acceptance criteria, I think this is the overwhelming, this would be my biggest tip for product managers trying to explore this. For years now, we've banged on about how important it is for product managers to be able to write good acceptance criteria.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whether you put it in Jira, it doesn't matter where you're putting it, right? Everything really starts with you being able to articulate inputs, outputs, how something's meant to function, and then providing that back to an engineering team or QA engineer so you can iterate on that feature and get feedback from users on it.
I mean, this feels like quite a heavyweight application to have built in, teaching yourself AI coding in 3 weeks. Tell me a bit more about how did you started in Lovable, you switched to Windsurf? Like, what's been your process, or how has your process evolved over this time to kind of get to where we are now?
Yeah, so let's have a look at the Windsurf interface. This is the Lovable interface. All you get is like a chat interface, and then there is like an edit button here where you can specifically change margins and things on stuff. Now, ironically, because my project started in Lovable and because I've uploaded it to GitHub, Lovable has then carried on tracking my commits to GitHub, and the latest version of the application still sits within Lovable, which is kind of cool if you think about it, because it's syncing between platforms. Here we're trying to fix an import error on Google. So looking at the error message, I can see that the issue, and I've copied this error message out of the console, which is, I think anyone could figure out if they press inspect. There you go. It's looked at how to do that fix, and then it's explained what those fixes are, and then it's gone on to deploy it. And you can see this is back and forth.
When you started with this, did you have a whole project plan and things like that? Or were you more kind of like starting with just a very high level prompt that you then refined actually in Lovable as it started to build
things? You can
things?
go back right to the beginning and see exactly what I put in. So create an app that allows me to upload a PDF. The text will then be extracted from the PDF. Please create an edge function in Superbase. And that's only because I'd been doing some research on where to do those sort of things. To do the text extraction.
Okay.
Then the user can submit the extracted text to OpenAI, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there were questions that it needed to ask. So how are we going to do user authentication? What is your OpenAI API key? Then it starts setting up policies for how it interacts with the database. And you can see I'm having a conversation back and forth with it. The frustration that I had with Lovable is that I needed to see what was going on behind the scenes. It doesn't matter how good your prompt is. There's going to be a degree of interpretation to it. And being able to see exactly what it's changing within the code allows you to objectively say, has it interpreted that correctly? In a really blunt way, I mean, we can see examples in Windsurf, but if I ask it to do something and then it goes away and I can see it reasoning around changing a file that has nothing to do with the feature I'm talking about, it's easy for you to then jump in and say, hang on, that's probably not the right place.
I've certainly noticed that myself is, you can put in these very general prompts and like all sorts of amazing things can happen, but actually behind the scenes, some fairly crazy stuff's going on. And the better you sort of actually constrain what you're asking it to do in any one step, and then the better you provide context around that little chunk, then the better results you get.
I put up a LinkedIn post last week about how you can quickly get out of Lovable and into one of these IDEs, and you can follow along for that.
But this is essentially, don't you just, you connect Lovable to GitHub, upload everything to GitHub, and then download it to your IDE?
Yeah, pretty much. So this is Windsurf. It's like a clone of VS Code.
This immediately looks very technical, but you're promising us basically this would have been completely beyond you 3 weeks ago when you started this process.
Yes, you can see at the top here, this is a project documents manager.tsx. It's a TypeScript file. The first thing I did when I pulled all these files down was that I wanted to understand the function of everything that was going on. And so I just copy and pasted the code from the file into ChatGPT. Doesn't matter, all of them every single model from 4.0 on up is pretty good at this, and said, explain this file to me. And then write me an annotation I can put at the top. And so lots of them, and I've slowly changed these over time or got rid of them as the annotations have got better throughout the files. But this was basically me saying, right, I'm going to keep track of everything that's going on and understand what they actually do.
And are you doing that to add comments in the code? So for each function, you know what it's doing?
Correct.
That sort of thing?
Yeah, I think every great engineer comments their code and makes sure that another engineer can then go pick it up. Mine was even more basic than that, which is, I don't understand what any of this code is doing. Just tell me what the page does. This is a folder called archive where I've gone through every single file, annotated it, and then found all of these files that weren't needed anymore. I learned more about TypeScript, about how this was built, modern like development processes, just by annotating it and then stripping stuff out and then seeing if it still works, than I could have with hundreds of hours on YouTube.
That's a really good kind of practical tip. So kind of like copying the code of each individual file into ChatGPT, asking for the annotations. You've obviously really been prioritizing your own learning and sort of understanding the code. What other kind of really practical things have you been doing to kind of learn so quickly?
Definitely 3 weeks ago, I went to ChatGPT to ask questions. But what I've realized over the past few weeks is that there is something fundamentally different about having an AI as a 24/7 real-time coach versus a real person. I've worked with some amazing engineers, and lots of them have been very patient enough to sit down with me and say, this is how this thing works. But there's a point where you're like, well, that person's getting paid to write code, not educate me. That's with ChatGPT, that's a $20 subscription that, and you could probably do it without a subscription. You could do it in DeepSeek or something else. But that's $20 a month for someone to be coaching me 24/7 in real time for every single question I have. And because these questions are largely around something that's incredibly well documented, which is software engineering and development generally, it's never led me astray. It's never given me a wrong answer. And that could go in corporate land. There's an expression which is, there's no such thing as a dumb question, or there's no such thing as a stupid question. I always felt rather cynically that was a bit of a veiled way for people to reveal their ignorance in the room, because something being a dumb question really is a case of perspective by the individual that says it, right? That you could still come up with dumb questions. But with AI, that doesn't matter. I honestly could ask it the dumbest things in the world. It does not matter. It will still answer. It will still patiently come back to me to answer another question. And if I get frustrated, it won't care.
Are there particular questions that you asked it that just completely changed the way you were thinking about things? Are there kind of like questions that you're really glad you asked?
Yeah, I think so. Here is a conversation I was having with ChatGPT this morning about, OpenAI have just released a new SDK. And within that SDK, they've provided the tooling to be able to create an agent that can go search the web. Now, all of that has been available in ChatGPT, the interface, for ages. But being able to call that via an API has not been. They've also created all of the structure for you to be able to hand one thing from one agent to another agent. So let's say, hypothetically, one agent's doing the research synthesis, and then it's handing that synthesis to someone else that's then putting it into a large piece. There's all sorts of crazy things you could do with it. But this is me talking to them about how I could build a prototype to do that. I know nothing about Git beyond some of the basic commands. I know nothing about Python. I know nothing about how these agents are built, or what you would say in the CLI to get these things done. So I've said what I want to do, and then I want you to talk me through building this agent and testing it locally. Bear in mind that I'm not an engineer, so every step will need to be explained appropriately. And that's a big difference. You can create a project space and give it instructions. So here, for a lot of my education, I'm completely new to software engineering. Whenever I ask a question, assume I know nothing about software engineering or the tools used to build software. I'm working on a Windows machine, so make sure any recommendations are specific to that machine, and make sure any command suggestions are for Windows PowerShell. So something I realized quite early on was that it was giving me lots of instructions for a Mac. That being in place, whenever I ask a question in this particular project now, it bears all of that in mind. But it doesn't matter whether you're in a project space or somewhere else. It helps guide you through it.
That's amazing. I hadn't even noticed that projects section of ChatGPT, and I use ChatGPT daily.
So let's look at that original question, and then you can see the level of detail it goes to. So open Windows PowerShell, navigate to your project folder or create it if it doesn't exist. In your case, run whatever. Set up a Python virtual environment. It's giving me all the commands. There is nothing here that you couldn't just follow along on.
Yeah.
Then it tells me how to install them. Then it tells me, right, this is your code. Go create this file, drop it in.
I'd really be interested, like, you've got a new idea for a feature. What is your kind of end-to-end workflow then, from kind of having the idea in your head through to actually like getting it into the code base as a working feature?
So I won't go into the idea tool to talk about new features until I've figured out architecturally how that's going to work with a cheaper, a more economically viable process. So ChatGPT is $20 a month. It doesn't run out of credits on certain models, or it hasn't for me. I'm actually using O3 Mini High here, which does eventually run out of credits, but not particularly quickly, and then it refreshes the next day anyway. Whereas if you were to do it on something like Lovable, or on Windsurf, or on Cursor, and also partially on things like Replit, you end up having to pay for credits. And so and I think another big takeaway would be, don't waste credits on education.
So you're starting kind of like the thinking process in ChatGPT or like general LLM, and what are you asking it at that point?
So one of the things that I really want to do is basically provide someone the ability to chat directly to a PDF. My opening question would be, how do you how do I go about doing that? What would you suggest is the right way to engineer that? Now, the challenge is that if you spend too much time engineering in or letting ChatGPT write the code, and then you try and move that over to your code base, you are going to have issues. So I wouldn't waste any time on education in a credit-based system like Lovable or Windsurf or Cursor. Do all of that in a ChatGPT.
So when's the right time then to switch over?
When you have a confident idea of how the thing is going to be implemented. So I'll give you a practical example. This research agent has to be built in Python, but you can't deploy Python to a Supabase edge function. So every single other API call that I'm doing in JavaScript, which sits in an edge function on Supabase, I wouldn't have been able to do that in the same way. Now, if I'd gone into Windsurf and said, right, I want to do this thing and describe the features, I would have wasted all these credits discovering that I couldn't then do that. So although I don't know why Superbase's edge function can't run Python, probably every engineer listening to this will go, obviously it can't. I didn't know that. Sure. So what that means is that I've then got to go figure out how to deploy a Python web service somewhere else, which then leads to another question, which is where can I do a free deployment of a Python web service? And so I figure all of that out on ChatGPT first, and then I go into the IDE and I say, this is what I think the technical solution is, and this is where I want to build it out. I think the other challenge is, and I don't think you can get away from the annotation piece, because when a project gets complex enough, it doesn't matter how specific you are, there will always be a way to interpret that feature in a way that you have not imagined. So the closer you can get in terms of where to build it, how to build it, and why to build it, all those three questions, the better before you go into an IDE and start doing it.
Yeah, I wanted to chat to you about the folder structure, because it's certainly one of the issues I've had just playing around with Replit a little bit, is that, very quickly you get, as you say, like duplicate files, or you get kind of like files that are, too big. How have you kind of learned or coached Windsurf to give you a sensible file structure as the project expands? So
again, I think there is a bit of human intervention here. So me going through every file, getting it annotated, and then figuring out where there might be some overlap in functionality. I probably spent a good 2-3 days then ripping out pages and reorganizing things a little bit. I don't think you need to know how to code to do that. I think it's just a question of, I think there's a duplicate effort going on. You can very tentatively say to any AI, I don't think this file's needed, but before you start stripping anything out, can you go through all of the code base and see where I might have referenced it, where it might be used, and then make suggestions on how to synthesize this? Lovable does constantly pushes for refactoring when it sees a file getting too big. But what I found is that when I came out of Lovable, that refactoring had resulted in it creating multiple other files that were partially recreating what might be done elsewhere. So it's the process of just talking to the AI and then saying, well, I'm going to delete this thing. Does that matter? And then, you figure it out. But
follow-up question then on the tooling is, you're using ChatGPT, you're using Lovable, you're using Windsurf. How did you decide to use those tools rather than some of the alternatives?
Dumb reasons. Unfortunately, I wanted to get out of Lovable. I knew I could put it up on GitHub. I started looking at, the first thing I looked at was how could I interact with GitHub with it staying in GitHub, code staying there. So Replit is a good example of that, which had like a cloud-based IDE. And it turned out that Windsurf had just an easier flow in terms of connecting to GitHub. I don't think there's any massive difference between that and Cursor. I really don't think it matters either way. And now I'm just kind of, brand loyalty, all that jazz. Plus, I've spent money on Windsurf now, or Codium, or whatever the name's company called. So I feel like I'm invested in their success.
Okay. Well, tell us briefly, like, what are your plans going forwards with this? Are you going to keep building out functionality? Have you got plans to kind of make it public?
Yes. So, product plans is I would love to make this product available to multiple users. So I think the real test here isn't me just hacking away at what something that looks like a good piece of SaaS software. It needs to actually be tested with hundreds, if not thousands, of users. So that's the end goal there. And then if I can get that running, who cares? It's more of a validation effort. I think bigger picture though. The role of a product manager, putting software engineering aside a minute, because I think it's a bit abhorrent when people say, oh, it's going to fundamentally change someone else's role that I've never done. But from a product management perspective, it is going to fundamentally change. If I can spin up my own prototypes in a day, the idea that you would ever do a low fidelity prototype to test with users is just a waste of time now, right? When you can get so close to a high fidelity prototype. And so what I'm really curious about once I've got this product up and running and people using it, my family are full of doctors, by the way, so they'll be the first end users of it as they grab all their content there. But my next step there is to see, well, what's the ultimate workflow to prototype something really, really quickly to get validation on it. I've worked in product teams where the discovery phase, as much as we think it's been really, really agile and quick, and we've iterated with low fidelity prototypes, and we've tested things with users, there's still a lot of subjective conviction that goes into an idea. It really depends on how much someone believes in it before it actually gets to production. I would love to remove that. I'd love to remove that. I would love to be at a point where you can test a piece of a product so quickly that ideas get thrown away as quickly as humanly possible. I think the reason that's interesting to me is because I think all of this stuff is going to unlock another growth in terms of hyper personalization. Why am I using a tool like Evernote for 10 quid a month that is designed for tens, if not hundreds of thousands of users, when I could have my own Evernote, my own note taker that's perfectly customized to my needs and my features? I think that's the direction of travel. I think the cost of doing this stuff has rocketed so quickly to zero that there is no reason for me to now have to use a tool that has been generalized to hundreds, if not millions of people. I can build something that perfectly meets my needs. So that would be mission number 2. I've got a massive, like any product manager, tech nerd, I've accumulated a lot of SaaS subscriptions in 20 years. I've already started removing those, right? Feedly was the first to go. Why am I paying £4.99 a month for an RSS reader when I could just rebuild that in a day, which I already kind of have through this tool? So that's what I'm going to look at next, is kind of how do you rapidly create something that's hyper personalized to the needs of the end user that doesn't have to be generalized to be scalable and profitable.
Yeah, very nice. Final question then. I mean, you've mentioned a lot of great tips here, a lot of resources. Are there any sort of particular links, resources, people that you would mention to someone embarking on this journey that you haven't already mentioned?
I have not once in the past 3 weeks Googled a question. I have done it all through ChatGPT, and I know a lot of people will be like, well, that's skeptical, why aren't you heading to Stack Overflow and all these sorts of things? I can put the exact problem I have into ChatGPT, share an image of it, and I'll get an exact answer back, rather than, to my earlier point, a generalized solution to what people think the problem will be for multiple people, right? So I've stopped using those resources. The thing I have started doing is I start following people on LinkedIn that are talking about the latest tech. And a few months ago, I wouldn't have done that. I would have thought they're just born again Gen AI, charlatans. Like I don't need this in my life, right? But actually, every now and again, 1 in 100, there's someone with a nugget that is going to fundamentally change what you're doing that becomes really valuable. And that's a lot quicker than, say, following Twitter or following a specific person, having an army of people basically all talking about it. Like I found out about the SDK about a few hours after it was released, about 6 a.m. this morning, because I saw someone on LinkedIn post up on about it. And suddenly I'm like, right, I'm going to get up, I'm going to go start experimenting with that. By lunchtime, I've got a prototype up and running.
Any favorite people you'd recommend?
I have to. So I'll send a list and you can share it around in the notes. But the one person who is really really fun to watch at the moment is a guy called Tommy Giecco. I might be pronouncing that wrong. He historically has come at this from a design perspective. I think I might be oversimplifying his value prop there, but he's a wonderful designer, and they do these things called build wars. And actually, a few weeks ago, they did a build war between one of the founders of Lovable and a guy that basically builds websites for a living through WebFlow. And I thought that was so much fun, because a lot of the stuff around AI in the AI industry, it can be very difficult to get your head around, because people come in at a very academic level around how it all works, and you get bored. You're just like, I don't understand what that means. I spent 8 years with data scientists. I still don't fundamentally understand a lot of what they did. But I think if people are coming at it from an end user perspective, like Tommy does, where you're like, okay, well, this is the benefit to the end user, and look how cool this experience is now for them. That's really cool. So I would go follow him. He's on every single platform.
We'll do that then.
All right.
Well, look, thank you, James. It's been fantastic having you on the series. Thank you for being so generous with your time and your learnings. And we wish you all the best for the future.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Ed.